They said the sky was closed. Command swore no jets would come, no rescue would break through the fire. On the ground, the SEALs braced for the end, certain the valley had already been written off. And then, out of the smoke, one aircraft arrived in silence. You're watching the Story Scape, where impossible orders collide with unforgettable courage. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The valley smoldered under a broken sky. Smoke coiled along the ridges, torn apart by the staccato rhythm of heavy machine guns. Mortars fell with a cruel tempo, and each impact rattled the stones where the SEALs crouched in the dust. Their boots were shredded, their magazines thin, and their wounded radio man was being dragged inch by inch toward a half-buried culvert that offered no promise of safety. Senior Chief Brooks pressed his back to a fractured wall, scanning the ridge with eyes that had seen too many dead ends. Above him, the enemy moved with bold confidence, calling to one another, slamming fresh belts into weapons, settling in to finish the hunt. He tapped his headset and heard only the repetition that had been echoing all afternoon. No air support available. It didn't matter how many times command said it. The meaning was the same. You're on your own. Brooks looked at his men, faces streaked with grit, movements tight with exhaustion, yet none of them ready to fold. 2 minutes, he told them, voice low. We shift left on my mark. He didn't say what they all knew, that 2 minutes could just as easily be the end. 20 miles away, slicing low through mountains the maps called impassable, Captain Mara Kincaid flew in silence. Her jet, an aging beast painted with a call sign she had long since earned, Whisper, hugged the terrain with a stubborn grace. Official orders had denied her sortie. Protocol said no aircraft were cleared. But she had ordnance, fuel, and a reason, and those weighed heavier than signatures on a page. The sky around her wasn't empty. It was hostile. Radars probed like hungry knives, searching for a lock. Fuel numbers ticked downward in cruel increments, but Mara's hands were steady on throttle and stick, her mind tracing lines through valleys as if the mountains had been drawn for her alone. She didn't broadcast on comms. She didn't ask for clearance. When the ground begged for miracles, asking only wasted time. Below, Brooks caught the shimmer first, a flicker on the haze, a metallic glint banking where no aircraft should have been. He blinked, half convinced the heat was lying again. But then, it dipped into a fold of the ridge, vanishing with the deliberate motion of something alive. His jaw tightened. Movement northwest, he told his team. Could be ours. The younger operators turned skyward, hope rising and colliding with disbelief. Command had said no, yet something in the air didn't care what command had said.
She wasn't flying to be noticed. She was flying to make sure they weren't erased. Mara lined up her first pass without a word. Flares spat bright against the gray, not for spectacle, but for survival. Her jet screamed low across the ridge, and the earth answered. Trucks blossomed into fire. Fighting pits collapsed into silence. Men who owned the high ground a heartbeat ago were suddenly learning gravity's final lesson. In the culvert, the SEALs stared as the valley itself seemed to change sides. Brooks didn't cheer. He counted seconds, measured silence, and gave the only order worth giving. Shift left, while she holds them, we move. But Mara knew better than to believe in easy victories. On her egress, the threat receiver wailed, sharp and steady. This wasn't a bluffing lock. It was a predator waking up. She broke hard into the shoulder of the mountain, the altimeter spinning as she threaded terrain that wanted her gone. Fuel bled faster than it should have. The second pass would cost more than the first. The tone in her headset held steady, drilling into Mara's headset with mechanical certainty. She knew the language. It wasn't a casual radar sweep. It was a commitment. Somewhere on the ridge, tucked under camouflage nets or hidden inside a cave mouth, a launcher had been waiting for exactly this moment. The enemy had planned on air support eventually showing up. They just hadn't planned on her showing up, alone. She forced the jet down into a ravine so tight that stone blurred in the canopy. Her right hand trimmed, left hand coaxed the throttle with brutal care. Dust plumed in her wake, and the beast of aluminum and hydraulics growled as if insulted by the terrain. She pulled flares again, each one blooming bright in the thinning air, bait for the missile she hadn't yet seen. The men below didn't need to see the missile. They could hear the difference. A low rumble carried across the valley, unnatural against the staccato of gunfire. Brooks felt it in his teeth before he registered it in his ears. "They've got launchers," he barked. The team pressed tighter into their cover, instinct screaming that what hunted in the sky cared little for what hid on the ground. Doc Ruiz shoved the radio man's body deeper into the culvert, shielding him with his own. The younger operators exchanged glances, each one understanding what a missile meant for their last shred of hope. If the jet fell, so did their window to survive.
Mara checked her scope. Nothing clear, just shadows pretending to be rocks. The spike didn't blink. She clenched her jaw. She could break contact, run for altitude, burn what fuel remained, and hope to make it back to base. Command would call it wisdom, but wisdom didn't matter when men on the ground had already been written off. She hadn't come this far to save herself. She had come because they weren't allowed to die forgotten. The first missile announced itself in fire. Smoke ripped from the ridge, a white snake twisting against the darker haze. Mara rolled hard, flare streaking behind her, the jet shuddering under the brutal pull. The missile chased, snarling heat-seeker hunger, then bit the decoy in a flash that rattled her bones. One gone, more to come. Below, Brooks saw the explosion paint the sky and thought it was over, but the jet emerged from the glare, wings level, engines howling like they had taken the insult personally. His men didn't cheer. They exhaled. That was enough. Mara forced the jet into another run. Ammunition counts blinked on her HUD, each number a promise waiting to be spent. She locked her eyes on the ridge, hunting for the launcher crew bold enough to fire and stupid enough to think she'd leave them standing. Trucks shifted, silhouettes scurried, but she knew the rhythm of fear. Fear always tried to hide too late. She rolled, lined, released. The GAU-8 spat its iron hymn, and the ridge shook as if something ancient had just woken in anger. Rocks fractured, the nest of launchers torn open in dust and flame. A secondary blast rolled across the valley, deep and final. Brooks pressed his helmet tighter to his head, listening to the mountain thunder. He whispered, not for anyone else, but because men needed to mark miracles when they happened. He said, "That's for us." And for the first time all day, he believed it. But Mara's threat receiver didn't go quiet. New tones bled through, overlapping, angry. The ridge wasn't empty, it was layered. One launcher dead, another waking. Her jet's hydraulics whined, fuel tanks bleeding faster than they should, warning lights daring her to choose between survival and defiance. As she pulled into the turn for a third run, the valley lit with a second launch, 2 missiles this time, weaving upward together, their smoke trails crossing like blades aimed straight at her. The 2 missiles twisted upward like angry spears, smoke claws cutting through the haze. Mara felt the lock in her bones, every instrument in the cockpit screaming at once. She didn't wait. Instinct and training married in a fraction of a heartbeat. Her left hand slammed the throttle forward, right hand wrenched the stick, and the jet pitched into a roll that nearly tore the breath out of her chest. The canopy filled with sky and stone at once. Blue horizon flipping, jagged ridgelines clawing past in a blur. Flares spat again,
streaking heat into the path of the hunters. The first missile lunged for the brightest bait and died in a blossom of fire. The second was smarter, curling wide, ignoring the decoys, learning the shape of her jet like a predator that had patience. Her breath came in sharp bursts. She rode the turn harder, letting gravity stack against her spine until her vision tunneled. The missile stayed. Its engine flared, its path unbroken. She gritted her teeth and dropped the jet even lower, skimming a ravine so narrow the wings barely cleared the walls. Dust avalanched in her wake. The missile followed, a white fang tearing after her. On the ground, Brooks and his team watched in stunned silence. From their angle, it was like watching a knife fight between gods. The jet screamed through the valley with impossible speed, a comet of flares and smoke, and the missile snapped at its tail with relentless hunger. "Come on," one of the operators muttered under his breath, as if sheer will could bend physics. Mara's hand hovered over the last flare switch. She waited, forcing the missile closer, closer, until the warning tone in her headset turned shrill. Then she punched it. A cluster of flares bloomed, and the missile lunged, too close, too hungry. It detonated behind her tail, the shockwave slamming into the fuselage like a giant's hand. The jet bucked, warning lights flaring red across her console. Hydraulics screamed. One stabilizer was damaged. The jet pulled against her like an angry beast. She corrected with muscle and instinct, teeth bared, riding the shuddering machine back into control. Fuel bled faster now, and every system warned her this dance couldn't last. But on the ground, the men saw only survival. They saw the jet burst from the blast, still flying, still theirs. Ruiz laughed once, sharp and raw like a man who'd seen death miss by inches. Brooks didn't laugh. He studied the sky with eyes that knew cost. Every second she stayed up there was a second stolen from her own life. The enemy wasn't stunned. The ridge erupted with gunfire again. PKMs, DSHKs, everything they had pouring lead into the sky. Tracers arced upward in angry streams, trying to cage her. Brooks's men pressed into the culvert as rounds stitched sparks across stone. The wounded radio man stirred weakly, whispering something that Ruiz couldn't catch over the roar. She wasn't just fighting gravity, she was fighting time itself. Mara steadied her breath, ignoring the chaos in her cockpit. She rolled out for another pass, eyes narrowing on the ridge where the launchers had hidden. Her HUD blinked with diminishing ammunition. Each round left was a decision. Each second in the air was borrowed from a debt she couldn't repay.
"Target," she whispered to no one. She rolled into the dive. The GAU-8 thundered again, its roar drowning the world, and the ridge disintegrated in chunks of rock and flame. Trucks tumbled, men scattered, and another launcher folded in on itself under the storm of shells. Below, Brooks seized the opening. "Move!" he barked, dragging the team from cover. They sprinted through smoke, boots pounding loose gravel, carrying their wounded like the weight was nothing. They reached the shadow of another ridge, breaths ragged, but alive. Each step forward was stolen from the enemy's arrogance. But Mara wasn't free. Her jet staggered as systems bled out. The stick fought her, hydraulics grinding, warning alarms layering into a cacophony. She was running out of airspace, out of fuel, out of everything. The enemy hadn't quit either. From deeper in the mountains, fresh flashes erupted, more launchers hidden further back, emboldened by her persistence. 2 more trails of smoke clawed skyward, angling for her position. The jet shook under her grip as the radar lock screamed steady, and Mara realized the mountain had one last card to play. 2 missiles rising from opposite flanks,
closing in, with no room left to run. The missiles rose from opposite flanks, trails crossing in the haze like blades swung by giants. Mara felt her chest tighten, the kind you didn't outfly, not with a wounded jet, not with the mountain boxing you in. Her warning system screamed in chorus, red lights washing her cockpit in a glow that felt like a countdown to silence. She pulled hard into the stick, dragging the jet into a dive that rattled bolts loose. The mountains clawed at her wings, too close, too sharp, but she had no choice. Flares spat behind her, bright decoys carving false paths in the air. One missile took the bait early, veering wide and detonating in a brutal blossom of light. The second ignored the trick, its seeker fixed like a predator that had already chosen its kill. The shock wave from the first detonation slammed her aircraft sideways. Panels rattled, a warning tone flatlined into a single merciless note. She fought the controls, one stabilizer failing, hydraulics groaning. The jet bled altitude faster than she wanted, and her margin for recovery was shrinking into inches. On the ground, Brooks and his men saw the sky split in fire. One missile gone, but another still clawing after her. They ducked as debris rained down, stone fragments hissing through the air. Ruiz checked the radio man's pulse with one hand while gripping his rifle with the other. No one spoke. They all knew, if that second missile struck, their last chance died with her.
Mara forced the jet through the canyon's throat, walls rushing past like closing jaws. The missile dove with her, smoke twisting, its warhead hungry for the heat of her engines. She cut throttle for a second, bleeding speed, dropping temperature, and yanked the stick into a savage barrel roll. The missile overshot by a breath, skimming the rock wall, and detonated in a roar that ripped boulders free. The jet bucked, debris hammering its fuselage. One engine coughed, then caught again. She breathed once, shallow, and leveled out. Her cockpit was a litany of warnings, fuel bleeding into impossible numbers, hydraulics degraded, systems flashing yellow and red. But she wasn't finished, not while the valley below still lived. She wasn't flying a jet anymore. She was dragging a dying beast back into the fight. Brooks saw her bank wide, smoke trailing from her left wing. It should have been the image of retreat. Instead, she leveled, nose down, diving again into the ridge. "She's coming back," one of the operators said in disbelief. Brooks didn't answer. His jaw set. He knew what it cost to come back, when leaving was the smart play. The ridge erupted again, enemy gunners pouring tracers into the air, trying to cage her. The valley lit in stuttering orange as heavy guns stitched the sky. The seals pressed tighter against the rocks, sparks showering around them. Every man knew the truth. No one survives 3 passes. Not like this. Mara lined her sight. The GAAU-8 coughed once, then roared, each round a hammer blow. The ridge tore apart under her fire. Trucks became fireballs, fighting positions erased. The enemy scattered, confidence shredded under the weight of physics. She pulled up, the jet screaming, airframe shaking like it might tear itself to pieces. But the reprieve was fragile. As Brooks led his team across the valley floor, dragging their wounded, new fire bloomed from deeper positions. The enemy wasn't finished. They had depth, layers, an entire net woven through the mountains. Mara checked her HUD. Fuel low, ammunition critical. One more pass, maybe 2, before physics made the choice for her. Her hand hovered over the comm switch. She could call it. She could admit she was burning out. She could let someone else write the last lines of this fight. But then she looked down, saw the small cluster of men hauling their wounded through the smoke, still moving, still refusing to die forgotten. That was enough. She steadied the jet, ignoring the alarms, ignoring the fatigue dragging at her bones. She was already writing the next move in her blood. As she rolled back toward the valley,
Her radar lit with 3 fresh locks at once, an ambush from every side, a storm of fire waiting to erase her on the next run. 3 tones screamed at once, layering in Mara's headset like knives pressed to her skull. Each one was a radar lock, hungry and precise. It wasn't harassment anymore. It was execution. Somewhere on the ridges, the enemy had staggered their launchers, waiting until she was too low, too damaged, too drained to escape. They had built a trap for any jet foolish enough to linger. She had lingered longer than anyone. Her fingers danced across the controls, instinct pulling ahead of fear. She dumped altitude, banking hard into a canyon throat, the jet rattling as its frame begged for mercy. Flares streaked behind her, hot and desperate. But 3 locks don't all chase the same lie. One missile peeled wide, another bent low. The third stayed cold and steady, hunting the heat signature she couldn't hide. Her threat receiver screamed constant, and then the first missile came alive. White smoke clawing upward from the ridge, slicing the sky in a straight, merciless line. The second followed, its trail weaving like a snake. The third waited, biding time, clever as the men who fired it. Mara ground her teeth. This wasn't about reaction anymore. It was about will. On the ground, Brooks shoved his men forward, sprinting across broken shale and dust. Tracers still poured overhead, the mountain vomiting fire at the jet that refused to leave. One operator stumbled, almost going down, and Brooks hauled him up by the collar. "Move!" he barked, voice ragged. Every second the jet stayed in the fight was a second they stole from death. But every second also meant she was dying up there, so they didn't have to. Doc Ruiz dragged the radio man with pure stubbornness, sweat streaking through grime. He heard the double thunder of missiles leaving their rails, and his stomach dropped. "She can't beat that," he muttered. No one answered. No one had to. Mara yanked the jet into a climb, forcing the missiles to chase her vertical. Her body crushed against the seat, blood pulling away from her eyes, vision tunneling into gray. She popped another flare spread, half her remaining countermeasures gone in one desperate move. The first missile lunged at the false suns, detonating early. The shockwave punched her canopy, rattling her teeth. The second bent through the spread, hunting deeper, locking tighter. Her engine coughed, fuel low, systems flickering. A red panel blinked like a heartbeat about to quit. But her eyes stayed on the ridge. She rolled hard, dragging the missile sideways, forcing it into a tighter turn than its engineers had built it for. It fought physics. Physics won. The missile wavered, overcorrected, and slammed into a rock face, detonating in a thunderclap that turned stone into rain. 2 missiles had died, but one was still waiting. The patient predator that had her name carved on it.
Brooks and his men hit the shadow of another ridge, lungs burning. They collapsed against stone, weapons low, magazines nearly empty. For a moment, silence ruled, broken only by the ragged breathing of men too tired to celebrate. Then, Brooks looked up and saw it, a single smoke trail still cutting across the sky, unwavering, unbroken, aimed straight for her. "Still one left," he said, more to himself than anyone. Mara felt it too. The third lock never wavered. Her threat receiver howled steady. She rolled low, skimming the ground, trying to trick the missile into biting stone instead of steel. It followed, clever, correcting with every twist. It wasn't blind. It had learned her heat, her rhythm. She pulled the jet into a canyon, walls so close they blurred in her peripheral vision. The missile dove with her, smoke scratching the rock. She dumped her final flares. They bloomed bright, but the seeker ignored them, cutting through like they weren't there. Her cockpit filled with the harsh tone of inevitability. On the ground, Ruiz clutched his rifle, watching the chase unfold above. "It's on her," he whispered. One of the younger operators shook his head, muttering prayers through clenched teeth. Brooks didn't pray. He watched, jaw locked, unwilling to believe the story ended here. Mara checked her HUD. Ammunition almost gone, fuel critical, no countermeasures left. Her jet was a battered husk, its system screaming in agony. But her hands didn't shake. She scanned the terrain ahead. Rock spires, shattered ridges, gullies carved by storms older than war. She saw a line, impossible, suicidal, but a line nonetheless. "All right," she whispered. "Come and get me." She shoved the stick forward, diving into the narrowest cut in the ridge. The jet howled, wings grazing air it had no business stealing. The missile followed, blind with hunger. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw set. The canyon narrowed to a throat, stone walls rushing in like fists. She rolled, once, twice, threading through by inches. The missile corrected. Too late. It struck the canyon wall in a blossom of fire that shook the earth. Stone collapsed behind her in a thunderous roar, sealing the path she had flown through. The shockwave battered her jet, tearing at its wings, but she broke free, engines gasping, smoke trailing from her fuselage, alive, barely. Brooks and his team saw the fireball spill from the canyon and felt the earth tremble beneath their boots. For a heartbeat, they thought she was gone. Then her jet burst from the smoke, scarred, limping, but still defiant. Ruiz laughed again, raw and unbelieving. "She beat it," he said. But Mara knew the truth. She'd bought minutes, nothing more. Fuel was gone. Ammunition nearly spent. Her bird was dying under her hands, and the mountain was still alive with guns. As she leveled out for what might be her final pass, the ridge ahead erupted, an entire battery of guns opening at once, a wall of fire daring her to try again.
The ridge burned like a living thing. Dozens of barrels thundered at once, streams of tracers climbing into the sky until the horizon looked like a wall of fire. It wasn't defense anymore. It was a punishment for her audacity. Every gun, every crew, every hidden nest had been awakened, united by a single vow: destroy the intruder who had stolen the mountain from them. Inside her cockpit, alarms blurred together, panels bleeding red and yellow. The left engine flamed, hydraulics stuttered, and her fuel gauge mocked her with numbers too low to matter. The jet vibrated as though it wanted to tear itself apart, yet her hands never wavered. Mara Kincaid had made her choice long before the valley ever saw her silhouette. This wasn't survival. This was defiance carried on steel wings. Below, Brooks and his SEALs staggered through the broken terrain. Their boots tore across shale, lungs raw, arms straining to drag their wounded. They had no magazines left, no grenades to throw, no backup to pray for. Only the shadow above, the single jet tearing itself to pieces so they could run. An operator stumbled under the weight of the radio man. Rees grabbed the harness, teeth clenched, hauling until they found balance again. "She can't last another pass," one muttered. Brooks silenced him with a glare. "Then we run faster." Mara's HUD blinked with the last of her ordnance. A handful of shells remained in the GAAU-8, an insult compared to the wall of fire ahead. But it was all she had, and sometimes a single strike was enough to shatter the illusion of invincibility. She pushed the throttle forward, coaxing her wounded machine one more time. The engine screamed, the frame rattled. She aligned with the densest knot of guns, a path so suicidal it almost felt holy. She wasn't aiming to survive. She was aiming to give them the one opening they needed. She dove. Tracers hissed past her canopy, one grazing the fuselage and peeling metal into sparks. The hydraulic pressure flatlined. The stick went heavy. She ignored the protests, eyes locked on the ridge. Her finger curled on the trigger. The GAAU-8 roared its final hymn. The mountain shuddered. Fighting pits vanished in a storm of fire. Trucks flipped, bunkers folded, and a chain of secondary detonations rolled outward as ammunition caches cooked off. A dozen nests went silent in a heartbeat. Flames climbed high enough to paint the valley floor orange. On the ground, Brooks and his men didn't hesitate. "That's our door," he shouted. They sprinted into the chaos, carrying their wounded, weaving between burning craters. A surviving enemy squad opened fire from the flank, desperate to cut them off. Muzzle flashes cracked through the smoke. Brooks shapped 2 quick bursts, dropping one while his men charged the others in brutal silence. Knives flashed, rifle butts cracked skulls. The fight was raw, desperate, over in seconds. And then the SEALs pushed on, the path still open, only because she was holding the sky.
But Mara was nearly out of time. The GAU-8 clicked dry. Her last flare was gone. Her left engine coughed once, then died with a groan like a closing door. The right engine choked on fumes. She dragged the stick back, muscle straining, trying to keep her bird alive long enough to clear the ridge. The wall of fire collapsed behind her in thunder and smoke. For an instant, she was through, jet trailing flame, wings shuddering, canopy glowing with reflected inferno. Brooks saw her silhouette cut across the blaze and felt something catch in his chest. She wasn't retreating. She was still flying, even in ruin. Her fuel gauge hit 0. The engine wheezed, starving. She searched frantically for ground, a stretch of dirt, a flat basin, anywhere to put the dying machine down. Stone rushed beneath her. She dropped the gear, praying it would lock. The wheels slammed earth, bouncing once, twice, sparks cascading. The jet skidded, shrieking across rock, tearing gouges in the valley floor, until finally it groaned to a halt. Smoke poured from its wounds. Silence. For the first time all day, true silence. The ridge guns were gone, the enemy broken. The valley itself seemed to hold its breath. Brooks and his men reached cover on the far side, collapsing with exhaustion. The radio man still breathed, barely, but alive because she had written a different ending for them. Brooks turned back, staring at the wrecked jet cooling in the dust. He wanted to key the mic, to shout her name, to tell her what it meant. Instead, he stayed quiet. Some acts don't need words. Mara sat in her cockpit, helmet heavy, breath ragged. The machine ticked as it cooled, smoke curling skyward like incense. She looked once toward the ridge she had erased, then down at the small cluster of men dragging each other to safety. That was enough. She didn't need medals. She didn't need anyone to know. On the valley floor, a battered jet rested in silence. Above it, stars clawed their way back through the haze. For one forgotten night in a nameless war, the sky itself had bent to her will and left her legend written in smoke.